My childhood home was a top-floor walk-up apartment in Lower Manhattan. By the time I was born, most of the bohemians belonging to my parents' downtown scene had decamped to suburbs or college towns, or at least to elevator buildings on the Upper West Side. Even I left New York for a few years, but my parents remained in their East Village apartment decade after decade. In the fall of 2018, I popped by to look for a toy to give my baby goddaughter. In the warren of their building's basement, my parents stored papers, books, and bubble-wrapped appliances, not antique so much as just old and unused. That afternoon, I went through the small, tiled lobby, past a padlocked door and down narrow metal stairs, into the dank space, 10 degrees cooler than the hall. I hit my head and cursed myself for doing it. On the rare occasions I've gone into the basement since I reached 5'9" in high school, I reminded myself not to stand up straight, and every single time I've forgotten and smacked my head on a ceiling pipe. In a heavy filing cabinet almost as tall as I am, I found what I'd come for: my old miniature plastic foods for playing kitchen, in storage since I'd graduated to a spirograph and sit-and-spin 35 years earlier. Then I noticed something in another of the heavy drawers that, in my haste to spend no more time in the basement than necessary, I hadn't seen before. Dozens of loose, dust-covered cassette tapes, labeled with the dates 1977 or 1976, the year I was born, along with names like Willem de Kooning and Edward Gorey. I'd never met any of these people, but I knew their names. They were painters and poets, people it would make sense for my father, Peter Schjeldahl, an art critic, to have known. Before I was born, he'd been a hotshot poet, giving readings at crowded galleries, lofts, and churches in Manhattan. His inspiration both for writing and for moving to New York City was his idol, the poet Frank O'Hara. O'Hara wasn't as famous a cultural figure of the mid-century as the Beatles or Andy Warhol, but to people who cared about art and literature, he and his cohort of cosmopolitan New York City poets and painters were the ones you would push past more famous people to get to. They ushered in a lusty new gay sensibility, urbane, witty, obsessed with all forms of culture, from Russian ballet to the trashiest Hollywood movies. O'Hara was the group's beating heart. In his early 20s, my father met O'Hara, 16 years his senior, a few times at parties. With his crooked nose and wide smile, high forehead, and light blue eyes, O'Hara looked soft and hard at the same time, part boxer, part librarian. He was short, but thanks to his perfect posture and a tendency to walk on the balls of his feet, he seemed taller. The last time my father saw him, O'Hara signed a catalog to him at a Museum of Modern Art opening, for Peter, with Palship from Frank. A month later, on July 25th, 1966, O'Hara died at the age of 40 in a freak vehicular accident on Fire Island, a gay-friendly vacation town off the South Shore of Long Island known for being car-free. A beach taxi he and his friends were taking from a dance bar to the house they were staying in broke down. While they were waiting for another taxi in the darkness, O'Hara was hit by a dune buggy, driven by a young man on a date. In my father's obituary for the Village Voice, he wrote, "Everything about O'Hara is easy to demonstrate and exceedingly difficult to understand." And the aura of the legendary, never far from him while he lived, now seems about to engulf the memory of all he was and did. The less affectionate New York Times obituary, which appeared with no byline, is riddled with an impressive number of errors given its brevity. Among other things, it said O'Hara was hit by a taxi, not a dune buggy, and it gave his address as that of Grace Church's churchyard, not a likely residence for a lapsed Catholic. Worse, it minimized O'Hara's literary importance, suggesting he was little more than a museum functionary and a muse who posed for a scandalous painting by the abstract expressionist painter and troublemaker Larry Rivers. The headline identified him as a museum curator. The subheadline, "Exhibitions Aid at Modern Art Dies," also a poet.